what can one say that hasn't already been said about a classic and an enormous game changer in cinema? And such is the case with Star Wars, now known as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Yeah. A lot about the movie, had it not done as well and just later became like a cult favorite or something like that, it would work as a self-contained film. But fortunately that didn't happen, or maybe, well, no, fortunately that didn't happen. And Star Wars became, one of the first big franchise films that so many others just desperately wanted to replicate. And some sort of did here and there, but also, obviously with the enormous amounts of profits one can make from merchandising and all that. Yeah, there was examples of that before Star Wars, and Planet of the Apes had that. But boy, Star Wars just really just exploded on the scene like that. And it's a template and model that has been sought ever since. And some succeed, but a lot don't, including now today Star Wars itself, sadly. But so I guess I'll a few thoughts on it, because I'm 49 years old. So in 1977, I saw the film in theater as a 7-year-old kid, and the impact it was just, it was almost an epiphanous moment. And I'd never seen anything like it. Of course, I'd like Star Trek and all that stuff, but this, and I'd never seen effects that good before and all that. And the opening scene that captures you immediately, and which is so many lessons about you really need to catch them quick and up front and first, one way or another. And Star Wars does all of that. And if I could provide a metric on its impact, certainly for the generation at the time, which I'm a member of, I often liken it to, for my parents, it was Elvis and the Beatles as the big cultural moment in their young lives, and for people my age, it was Star Wars. That's just the impact that it had, and looking back on it. One thing about the Beatles was the dream was always at one point there'd be some sort of reunion, and sadly it didn't happen. Here with Star Wars, they tease us with the reunion, and then they pulled the rug out from under us. Yeah, they sure did. So no real the band didn't get back together on that either. So that's all very sad. But the film itself that started it all, Star Wars, the Star Wars as it was called originally, what was it, The Adventures of Star Killer? A lot of different drafts and rewrites, and of course there's a comic book adaptation that Dark Horse did of George Lucas, is one of his earlier drafts, which is completely different, where Luke Skywalker is an old general and Anakin Starkiller is actually the hero. And the plot and whatnot is very reminiscent of the Phantom Menace and stuff like that. So it's interesting, and all of these things are always, concept art and that stuff, what might have been and where would it go and stuff like that. I always love that stuff, and it's a cool series to check out. But the film here, and I guess to put it in the context of the lore overall, now that it's a chapter in a story, to follow the template of the weekend movie serials and that sort of thing, and also folklore and which it borrows far more heavily from than science fiction, which of course I think it's more than enough beating that dead horse of that it's not really a science fiction series. Star Trek is, but Star Wars isn't. Star Wars has more in common with Lord of the Rings and that sort of thing. And that's all well and good. And so it establishes all of this very quickly, and that you have a princess, you have an old wizard, you have a young man who's on the hero's journey, and he's on his way to becoming a knight, and that sort of thing. So that's all there. And as far as the overall lore, again, there's problems with how the prequels were set up. They don't quite connect entirely, and that's the biggest flaw in the prequels as far as I'm concerned. among other things. I mean, the technical problems and stuff like that. But here, where you see the discussion of Luke's father, there is the pivotal scene there between him and Obi-Wan, where he asks him, well, how did my father die? And there's a moment there where Obi-Wan is kind of looking away like, oh boy. And then he says, well, a pupil of mine turned to evil and, betrayed and murdered your father and hunted down the Jedi and all that. And so it works by accident. I guess at the point, it's like Obi-Wan is a little embarrassed that a student of his murdered Luke's father in that scene, because at the time, Darth Vader is not Luke's father at that point. They hadn't thought of that yet. That came later, almost really late, during the production of Empire, because there was actually going to be scenes where Luke encounters the ghost of Anakin Skywalker and this sort of thing, and it was all cut out and all that. And then they came up with this idea, oh yeah, that would be really, oh yeah. And yet it works. You look back at that scene where Obi-Wan's a little nervous, and because he knows now it's the real story. It's like, well, Luke, you're dead. Became a monster and slaughtered everybody. Yeah. He just doesn't want to tell him this. And so it works. Unlike with the rest of it, like the prequels, and there's discrepancies there between what's been established by the original trilogy and that sort of thing. And yet it's fine. It works. Now, there's other things where the discussion where it seems to suggest that Anakin really was Owen's brother, and of course, he wasn't. I mean, the prequels tries to fix that with saying, well, technically they're stepbrothers because Shmi married Owen's father and all that. But they didn't really know each other. They briefly meet, and then that's it. And yet Obi-Wan said, he didn't think your father should have gotten involved. He should have stayed on the farm and all that. And yes, Anakin did come from Tatooine, but not like that. But you can chalk that up to Obi-Wan is keeping with this narrative that they told Luke to protect him from the awful truth that his father is Darth Vader. So, but that was in another movie. This one gives you your basic adventure story. They have a princess they have to save. The princess, is like they would see Princess Leia in today's terms of she's a female, who's weak and has to be saved. And no, she's not. These are impossible odds. You could not escape. She's captured and she's going to need help getting out, but she's more than capable of taking care of herself. And there's plenty of that in there all the way back. And I guess this would have been in 76 when it was shot, and it premieres in 77. So all the way back then, oh my goodness, but these people today who act like they've just now discovered, strong female characters or whatnot, it's just such a fraud. But here we have all of that and all those elements, the beginning, the appearance of Darth Vader, the entrance there, this one thing after another. Of course, groundbreaking effects for its time. A movie that revolves around two droids, one of which can't talk except for making beep noises. And it's kind of a bit of a ballsy thing there, where for quite a while it's just them, and then it leads you into what the story is, and it's sort of a narrative of discovery through these, weaves you through these characters and introduces you, and then you're off into the adventure. Now, initially there was different cuts to it. You've seen some of the footage. You could see the deleted scenes where there was going to be this cut where you're introduced to Luke very early, and he's out, working on the farm there, or the moisture farm or whatever it is, and sees, there's something going on in the atmosphere, and it's of course the battle between the Star Destroyer and Leia's ship. And it was established that Luke was a bit of an oddball and an outcast, kind of a nerd, and the other young people didn't respect him that much. He had one friend, and that was Biggs. But the edit like that was really bad, and it kept going back and forth and taking forever. And actually, it was George Lucas's wife at the time who came up with the edit that you end up seeing. It probably saved the film. Unfortunately, she wasn't a very good wife. She abandons him and their children. But that's another story. So a lot of that stuff was taken out. There is the radio show version, which has a lot more material of story there. And also explaining, there's mentioned by C-3PO, the princess won't escape this time, as if Leia has been in several adventures. And there's some of that in the radio version, which expands on the story. And it includes in there this story of Luke's life on Tatooine and his position there. And the only problem with this is Biggs, who we see at the end of the movie, and it's Luke's old buddy, and they explain who he is and everything, but it doesn't quite fit. You kind of needed him early on, just to explain his presence. I mean, the point is made that Luke is yearning to leave. He wants to be a pilot. He wants to go off and do these adventures and all that sort of stuff. And he can't. He's got his responsibilities to the farm, and Owen's holding him back and all this sort of thing. But with Biggs just showing up at the end there, it doesn't quite fit, but it's not that big of a deal. So, and then he explodes, smeared on the side of the Death Star. So you have all that, but the details of Luke's story is enough there that it still works within the overall story that became Star Wars in the latter two films. So that's all well and good, and just an incredible achievement at a time there, even with, nowadays you got the new digital effects, which some people were upset. They thought it was some sort of blasphemy or whatnot, but I appreciate it because some of those deleted scenes could be brought back, obviously with Jabba the Hutt, who was originally just some guy in a suit, and they cut it out, and then later on, the idea of him being more of an alien came into being, and eventually you ended up with what you got in Jedi. So being able to put that back in there, I think, is really rather nice. But yes, hand shot first. I don't care what the news is. No, that's who he is. Boy, and rewatching it after so soon of seeing Solo, does it match up? No, not really. Does that guy really become that guy? Even though, I think Solo's an okay film, but it doesn't quite work in the overall narrative with Star Wars. So this is the one that set it off, made it all. Empire, of course, is a superior film, but without this one, there is no Star Wars, and it stands on its own and remains this phenomenal achievement in the history of American cinema. Now, of course, a lot of aspects that seem to be established here would dissolve over the next two films, but they did it well. Whereas, I keep coming back to the prequel trilogy, and God, the sequel trilogy, just don't pay attention to these details and don't even try to make it fit. Where here, the original trilogy has to make its story work and fit within it. There's still some problems. Again, C-3PO mentions the princess and then later doesn't even know who she is, apparently. Just sort of recognizes her when the hologram shows up and stuff like that. But it's brief and quick and a bit of a slip. Of course, it appears that a love triangle is forming there between Leia, Luke, and Han. And of course, it's touched on, of course. Han suspects something, but no. And so it's dropped because, even though there's there's footage from Empire where it's obvious they hadn't quite made that decision yet about Luke and Leia being siblings, because there's footage from an earlier trailer where there is a scene where Leia kisses Luke in Empire, and it's very quick, and it's just this cheesy thing to make Han jealous and all that. But it was another shot where it's way more passionate than that. So you really can't do that. So they had decided, you know what? At some point, because I know the idea of Darth being Luke's father, had come about then, but I don't know that they had settled on the idea of twins and all that sort of thing, because they were still kind of chewing around at some other ideas, because they didn't know that Return of the Jedi would be the final film for a long time. There was some talk of another trilogy where Luke searches for his sister. That this would be a new character that they would come up with and all that. But then they decided, it's Leia, and just do it like that. So at some point, that part of the story was dropped. But nevertheless, it all worked. They tied it together, unlike... Yeah. So there you go. A great start to a once great franchise, and the first film is largely self-contained. You could just watch that one and never bother with the others. But then, you'd miss Empire, the glory of glories, and that'll be our next film that we'll look back at, looking back at the Star Wars franchise as we slowly come to episode 9. Yeah. Boy, have you heard the leaks? Yeah. So, anyway, there you go. Star Wars, A New Hope. If only there could be another New Hope, but I'm afraid not. Maybe The Mandalorian, but yeah. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my many stores that have plenty of goodies